misfortunes around. You see, I think, fellow, we need to recognize often that the greatest challenge about our economy is that almost South Africa has got two economies. There's one economy for those who are connected, and there are those South Africans who are left out. 53% of our people are living below the poverty line, and in the main, for many of them, they've been in recession for a long period of time. I think it's important to note the fact that this is not the cause for the recession is not a function of exogenous factors or international markets. It has a lot to do with South Africa's own decision-making and endogenous factors, as it were. This is our first recession since 2009, and it was thought that we'd entered a recession in 2017, but it had turned out not to be so. For many South Africans, this is a fifth consecutive year that we've been in recession on a per capita basis. Because for many South Africans, they're getting poorer and poorer year on year. It's become quite clear that one of Africa's largest economies is now one of its weakest, because it's very clear that other African countries are growing at a rate higher than ours. So, for example, Africa as a collective is growing at about 3%, with growth in Ethiopia, Cote d'Ivoire, Senegal, and Rwanda now above 7%. So to the first argument, which is to say that our economy is only affected by external factors, can't always hold consistently true. Many of the decisions that we've made are homegrown, and that's why we've ended up with this recession. We are of the view that there are two fundamental main factors that are driving this recession. One, our economic mismanagement, and two, are certainly bad policy. Our economy is structured in such a way that it's driven by consumer spending, and therefore you can appreciate that in the main, consumers are feeling the pressure. Household spending makes the largest single contribution to GDP. But years of real per capita GDP negative growth has left South Africans with less money to spend each month. Government has also taken from each and every South African's pockets, and this is done by petrol increases which have added to a profound level of inflationary pressures, VAT increases, sugar tax, and income tax increases. All of these punish the poor and the middle class and take more money away from hard-working families. And all this extra money is demanded by an inefficient, corrupt, and captured state and is not spent on productive investment. As one person once said, no nation can tax itself to prosperity. And therefore, you can see quite clearly that with the increasing of taxation, you are taking an assault to a consumer's ability to be able to spend and invest into the economy. Secondly, I think it doesn't matter where you travel all over the world. It's clear that investors are becoming more and more skeptical. And not only skeptical about developing economies, but they're becoming more skeptical about South Africa as a developing economy. South Africa is not unique. We're part of the global society. We have domestic factors and international factors. And so, from an investor point of view, South Africa must behave as a nation that is desperate for investment and is looking to attract people to come and spend money here in South Africa. And therefore, as a result of that, we need to do everything we can to attract domestic investment as well as foreign direct investment. And this requires a few interventions. It requires that we give certainty around policy. It requires us to ensure that the basics, such as the rule of law, the protection of property rights, and the safety of people who come and work in our nation is guaranteed. All of these elements are non-negotiable if you are going to become an investor-friendly community. And in fact, we're seeing more and more that these are in doubt in South Africa. It will in fact ultimately make sure that investors second-guess South Africa and make choices to other countries which feel more safer and more profitable for investment. The natural effect of this is that we're seeing the consequences of what this economic mismanagement and bad policies are having. The most obvious is the fact that unemployment is on the rise. Already 9.6 million South Africans cannot find work. Furthermore, it's become quite clear that our currency will feel the pressure as we've seen its depreciation, literally, even as a commentator highlighted so eloquently, that since the announcement of President Ramaphosa on EWC, it's become quite clear that even the currency has depreciated by over 15% in that period of time, since that period, which leads, in fact, to higher inflation and lower growth. So what's clear is that the ANC doesn't have a plan, the presidency doesn't have a plan. We need a plan to be able to bring about steps out of this recession. We need to ensure that South Africa is not seen as confused. It's seen as a country that says our actions going forward must look like this to ensure that our people can find work and we can begin to dig ourselves out of this recession. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's now time to take decisive action to put an agenda for reform for the people of South Africa. And what I want to do is table just 7 practical things that I believe South Africa can do up front. The first and most crucial is that South Africa must scrap reckless economic policies like the proposed nationalization of the Reserve Bank and the undermining of property rights through expropriation without compensation. The Constitution is sufficient enough to guarantee property rights. It is key for investment to ensure that anybody who comes here in South Africa, this is not just agricultural property, but it's also residential and commercial property, that people can be able to be certain that policy will mean that they can hold on to that property and be able to invest over a long period of time. This will be crucial if we're going to get ourselves out of this recession. We don't need to be spending time dithering on those particular policy pronouncements. The second is I really believe South Africa must announce a program of privatization. Policy or part privatization of South African Airways and ultimately begin to split Eskom into separate power units, one of production and the other a distribution business. Both these SOEs pose a profound fiscal risk for the people of South Africa. And any default on any of them will have a ripple effect on other sectors of our economy. And that's why I have now even officially written to even demand the terms and conditions of what the China loan to Eskom is. But having said that, I think we need to begin to split it up into those 2 business units, open it possible that ultimately better competition can come into the energy sector. Thirdly, we need to end Eskom's monopoly and allow cities the opportunity to purchase directly from independent power producers. One of the key successes about the Western Cape is that we tabled energy reform as a key stimulus to the economy. It started businesses where people could create solar power plants. They could create a space where factories could run out of different energy. And yes, historically, in its starting point, the input costs were high, but over a long period of time, it's helped businesses able to secure energy at much cheaper rates and be able to become much more productive in their outputs. And therefore, it will become crucial that we in fact allow cities to be able to purchase energy from a diversity of sources. It allows cities to be at the forefront of the drive, but furthermore, it stops the idea of the monopolization of energy from Eskom. Fourthly, we believe we must introduce a fiscal austerity package that contain cutting spending and stabilize national debt at about 50% of GDP. We must commit to we must commit to funding any further revenue shortfall by cutting wasteful expenditure, not through new taxes. And soon, when the midterm budget statement will be tabled, I'll put some of the proposals that we'll put forward about how we can cut some of the expenditure so that we can curb national debt. We are convinced that President Ramaphosa's cabinet is bloated. We must cut the cabinet to around 15 ministries. This is not a time where we can have a luxury of spending more on VIP security than you do on border control, as an example, or, for example, having ministers and deputy ministers at the level that we are. This could be a simple decision that requires decisive leadership and we should be cutting cabinet with immediate effect. We must exempt small businesses employing fewer than 250 employees from complying with restrictive labor legislation, other than, in fact, the basic conditions of employment. And there are many other restrictive policies that we believe businesses can be exempt from. And then 7, we must immediately pay all outstanding invoices owed to small businesses from the national and provincial governments. This will amount to a fiscal stimulus for small businesses of around 20.7 billion rands and 7.1 billion rands, respectively. Therefore, we believe that these particular 7 points represent more than just a policy shock to get the economy's heart beating again. They represent a change in approach from the belief that what the ANC has held on to, that state-led economic development is at the forefront and central, rather to say how do we assist in private sector markets to be able to help. We pursue a lean, a capable state that creates conditions to promote investment in a broadly open, competitive and a market-driven economy. In this, more change is required in reforming SOEs. These SOEs pose a financial risk to South Africa. The bottomless pits into which billions of rands of public money is poured in should never be seen again, on top of the higher prices the South Africans must pay for often shoddy services. Privatizing some of these SOEs will introduce competition in key industries like power production and transport. And as you know, in both these sectors, they've been beset by corruption, which ultimately adds to a higher cost of doing that business. This will ultimately reduce the cost of goods, which alone will be major for the economic growth. We believe this change alone should increase private sector investment in economic growth by as much as 3%. And ladies and gentlemen, these are things that we don't just talk about, we do already in government. We've seen how even in the city of Johannesburg, we've opened up the doors for more private sector investment through inner city revitalization that Herman Mashaba has already put in place. This is a private sector-led initiative where we're seeking to say, how do we bring on more investment into the city of Johannesburg so that ultimately we can begin to stimulate that economy. Our plan then emphasizes making it easier for entrepreneurs and small business owners to succeed. Growing the small business sector is the only way to is the only route to job creation on a massive scale. We must remove constraints on entrepreneurs by simplifying regulations and possibly by exempting them from restrictive labor legislation. Despite many constraints, some of them being weather, etc., where we govern, it's become very clear that the DA can grow the economy and create jobs. 3/4 of all jobs that have been created in the past year were created in DA-led Western Cape governments, despite the crippling drought. That amounts to a total of 123,000 new jobs created, while during the same period, 124,000 jobs were destroyed in Gauteng, in the country's biggest economy. And some of the interventions that we put on the table, as far as when we're in government is concerned, these are interventions designed at creating a conducive environment for investment, for competition, and economic growth. We cut corruption. We ensure that we break down barriers to entry. And ultimately, as you can see, even in the city of Tshwane in the recent while, we've tripled investment into the city of Tshwane in the last 24 months. Despite the drought in the Western Cape, we've achieved 2.7 billion rands in investment in the past financial year and innovation in the energy sector through a provincial government game changer, which has stimulated new industries and lower operating costs for businesses. The city of Joburg alone has attracted a 6 billion rands investment into the country's economic capital. And already Johannesburg has already focused on stimulating collaborative growth through calls for private sector investment. We want our economy to grow. We want our economy to be much more inclusive. And our options, even around looking at micro-enterprise, is designed in such a way that South Africans who are left out of the economy, particularly those who face difficulties in entering the economy, can be given a program where they can come in. We think a healthy growing economy will assist us in being able to collect the right revenue through tax to fund better education and a healthcare system, and a much more beneficial and compassionate welfare program. An effective land reform and restitution programs, and effective police servicing, trained, resourced, equipped to be able to maintain law and order and keep people safe. Without growth, ladies and gentlemen, revenue slide and redistribution become even less possible. Jobs disappear, investors flee, and ultimately poverty grows. It is then that the soil is most fertile for simplistic promises of populist demagogues. This is why we cannot allow this recession to in fact persist. We must, ladies and gentlemen, if we're going to do something, take the bold and decisive actions to get our economy heading in the right direction. Our failure to do so will have political, social, and economic consequences. And therefore, our urge is that we must intervene in these 7 areas, which will begin almost certainly to drive our economy in the direction that we need to see, where there's growth and inclusion and ultimately job creation for more South Africans. It's within that note. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Leader. If I can now open the floor for questions, and if I can have your name and the media house that you represent, and then the question. Any questions? I see 3 hands. Sorry, okay. 3 hands. Let's go from the back, front to the back.
Thank you very much. From ANC. I've seen that you've made a prior application for the terms and conditions for contracts that have been signed by the President of the Republic with the Chinese. What do you actually want to know when it comes to those terms and references of that contract or loan with the Chinese government in terms of Fiscal? And what's your response with relatively, do you have the stern view that the Chinese are seemingly economically colonizing Africa, and South Africa in particular, at this point in time? And with the economic plan to get the country out of the recession, will you be tabling these 7 points that you have presented here in the sitting in the National Assembly this coming week? Thank you.
Yes, please.
I'm Nombalana Pakati from Eyewitness News. Just a reiteration to one of Samkela's questions there about the colonization of Africa. Do you think that the terms of the loans given by China would maybe in a way bankrupt South Africa in the future? And to my question, which model or practical example would you be leaning your economic your recession plan on? Do you think that it is really going to be well received, and do you think it will, if implemented indeed, the model will succeed in getting South Africa the growth path that you so much desire?
Thank you. There was another hand at the back.
Natasha.
I saw 2. Okay, let's take the 2.
Okay, my name is Ndele. I'm with the ANC. We are told the small businesses contribute around 25% to the country's GDP. And we've seen the erosion of small businesses in the country, where the mushrooming of malls by Chinese and the mushrooming of China malls in Chinatown. And we've seen again small businesses in the townships and in rural areas being eroded with the coming of, let's say, Pakistani and Bangladeshi shops. As the DA, what plan do we have in place to drive the economy or a contributor to the local economy?
Sure.
What plan do we have in place to protect this sector?
Sure.
Natasha?
Natasha from the Business. I have 2 questions. The first one, the fiscal austerity package. Is there anything else besides cutting the cabinet that you would suggest? And the second is, what labour regulations or legislation should small business or any business be sort of exempted from? Our labour regime is pretty vast. So could you please be more specific on that?
Sure.
Oh, can you take the last question? Yes.
My name is Moses Murray from the National Assembly. Musi, you speak so much about the good work that you've done in Johannesburg, Tshwane, and Nelson Mandela Day. Are you able to give us how many jobs have been created in those areas? Like, for instance, in Johannesburg, Herman was big on he's going to create jobs. Are those jobs being created? And what are the figures?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. If that's all, we can go to the. Are there any more questions? Okay, cool. Leader, we can go to the answer.
Samkelo, there's a basic rule that when you run out of borrowing money from credible people, you go to Bomashonis. And when you look at Eskom's debt book, already you are talking in the hundreds and billions of rands, which line is limited. The domestic lending market is not open anymore to Eskom, frankly, because I think South African banks would not deem Eskom as an easy investment area. It's also very clear that in the international markets, when I look at even SAA's own debt book, big entities, Citibank, etc., that's one. Item in the budget is debt servicing costs. And debt servicing costs are fundamentally on the basis of not only our status as far as that an investment state. So in the question to China, they defaulted. This has been come with certain conditions that I hiding the nuclear deal terms and conditions. Why is Ramaphosa hiding the terms and conditions of this China law? It has potential to thoroughly endebt not only your children but your grandchildren, which will limit fiscal maneuverability of any kind. So I would urgently urge, that's why we've written a PIA, that's why we've ultimately said, and we've also, South Africa must have an opportunity upon which we've spoken at length about the destruction of certain economies by allowing an influx of certain products that come from China, certainly in the steel industry, about the profound consequences that's had on certain industries here in South Africa. So we need much better attitude that doesn't simply cede away many of our economies or many of our sectors to China, and that's why I'm demanding these terms and conditions. To your question about whether or not I'll be tabling these in the NA, of course. We have a debate on Wednesday night, Wednesday afternoon, that looks at this question of the recession. I find it extraordinary that Cabinet is not seized with this matter to the level that they ought to. And talk about a stimulus package and what. The fact of the matter is that we need deliberate interventions. And what it seems is that this is a Cabinet that doesn't seem to want to take the hard decisions. It seems to be very comfortable at saying to people, oh, well, we'll go borrow money and introduce stimulus packages. But the fact of the matter is that there are some tough decisions that we need to go for. And if we don't do those tough decisions, it doesn't matter. The ANC's policy has been state-led, and state-led economic development has found us at the point that we are now. It's the ANC's policy. And the miracle that I find in the ANC is they're now suffering from collective amnesia. It was all Jacob Zuma. Patel had nothing to do with it. Lindiwe Zulu, who was the Minister of Small Businesses, had nothing to do with it. It's the economic mismanagement of the ANC that has brought us. Corruption is but one aspect of the ANC. Their lack of plan for the economy is ultimately the issue that has brought us to this point. Therefore, we must table it in Parliament and ask the people, the Parliament of South Africa, to say, how do we consider these issues? Considering that in the next 2 months, we'll also be looking at the MTPPS. And unless the MTPPS, as a public participation process, doesn't address some of these issues, and we want to tax South Africans more, the best way I can sum it up is, as somebody told me this weekend, they said, Ingati, they are asking us to pay for all the Gupta's money that was stolen. That's what the South Africans are saying. They are being taxed to pay for the Gupta corruption. It's the ANC corruption. Now we're being taxed. Can't be. I think I've covered the question. You asked me this question about models. You know, we live in a world now today, our model favors much more a market-based economic plan. Part of South Africa's economic resilience has been on the basis of the engagement of the private sector. But what's got to be important going forward is that we must demonopolize certain things and deconcentrate certain economies. We must make it possible for more people to be able to enter the economy, not less. And therefore, for us, it becomes important that where the state has monopoly, we must privatize certain aspects so we can introduce more competition. SAA were not profitable in low fuel prices. How on earth are they going to be profitable in higher fuel prices? Yet Comair, in the same business model, have been able to successfully run a profitable airline with all their entities that are in place. Today, SA Express is on the ground. So for us, the issue is here. Let's demonopolize, allow better competition, allow more players to come on board. Let's also allow, furthermore, deconcentration, so that even along the energy sector, we mustn't be held ransom by Eskom. Because if Eskom tomorrow defaults, we will have dire economic consequences. So that's why I argue even here that allow cities the space to be able to purchase energy from different sources, so that ultimately we can give consumers the best choice on the table. So for us, the model, and we'll be tabling more documents that speak to economic or vula. We want these 7 points to say, let's open the economy. Open and reform. That is our plan. Because status quo isn't going to cut it. This thing has been going on for 5 years, and South Africans have felt it for 5 years. So let's bring the urgent change that we need if we're going to address questions of poverty, etc. Ntebo, you are correct when you say SMMEs make a significant contribution to GDP. But SMME regulation is important, and I think it speaks to the question that you and Natasha are both asking. For example, it becomes very difficult for certain SMMEs to comply with certain onerous labor legislation. The basic conditions of employment must remain, but I think our amendments must be, how do we introduce wage for apprentices? How do we ensure that there's actually a democratization of the voting when it comes to amendments to labor law, so that strike action becomes something that people don't just do on a collective bargaining basis, that actually people can vote? We believe that without doubt we must introduce job seekers exemption certificates, which allow people to say, look, when it comes to, and this is not about paying people slave wage, it's not about that. It's giving people who want to say, I want to come into the economic market, I'm willing to work for X and Y, I want to be able to, for a period of time, to get the right training, I want to be an apprentice, or I want to do this. It's how any economy in the world allows for more young people to enter the workspace. It allows for more competition in terms of the sale of skill, and ultimately it lets development take place. So we have the complete view that we need to be able to profoundly change that, because at this point in time, if you run a restaurant and you're trying to hire people, it becomes hard. And I think you asked the question about townships in Table, and some of the competition that's there. I think also if you look at restaurants, you can travel around Johannesburg. It always amazes me how so many of our waiters and waitresses are often non-South Africans. And I think we must ask the question, how is it easier for someone to hire a non-South African than to hire a South African? And I think some of it is because our labor regulations are complicated, very difficult, and therefore if you spoke to a businessman, whether they're in manufacturing or in any other sector, say to them, are you interested in hiring more people? The immediate concern is that through collective bargaining and other issues, there's a greater challenge at being able to keep people or to employ more people. For me, the only question for any South African should be, who today is going to employ more people? That's the only question. That should be what drives us. That should be what wakes us up every day. Are you hiring more people? And those people who are hiring more people should be the heroes. So I think we need to look at this issue more and say, how do we assist? And, help small businesses. To your question about what's happening in townships and happening with this mushrooming of small shops that are owned, I think we need better regulation. What we don't know at this point in time is who are the people who are coming into communities. Are those shops, whatever they are, properly regulated? Do they meet the respective health standards, etc.? And do we ensure that there's better competitive markets? I think South Africans must know that they are competing on a fair playing field. Because if you say to a South African, you must start a business here, they apply for business licenses, etc., so that they can be able to trade in townships. And you find some of these mushrooming small businesses aren't always compliant, aren't always registered, aren't always tax-paying entities. So our problem is not the informality of the sector. Our problem is the regulation in the sector. Because once we can regulate, we can deal better with who is trading where, why are they trading there, what regulations are in place, and are they compliant. But we must also have a decent conversation as a people of this country to say, how do we do a much more effective program on border control? Because for me, the stance on border control should always be, you want as many people to come in to South Africa, but you want to ensure that the proper regulations are in place. So if you go to the city of Johannesburg, there are certain pockets there. I don't have to tell you this. There are certain pockets where you can literally get there and the shops are run by people in South Africa who are not registered, and it's unclear what the nature and the extent of the business is. Our stance remains. Let's get an effective Home Affairs, let's register people, introduce regulation so that we don't end up with illegalities that are taking place. And I think South Africans only want what is fair. I think to say all South Africans are xenophobic and all of that, I don't necessarily think that that's true. Those are aspects of sensationalism. I think our people are simply asking for thorough regulation so that they know what's happening and that every citizen, regardless of where they come from, are properly registered in our country. And I think that's what people are asking for. Natasha, I can send you our whole position on the various aspects of the regulations that, furthermore, if you want more questions. I think it covered. Oh. On the stats around job creation in Tati. I mean, you can look at each city will table its own respective plans. I know Joburg in the last quarter had a net positive effect on the number of jobs that have been created in the city of Johannesburg, despite the challenges that are going on there. I can speak about the culture of investment. I know that Tshwane has tripled its investment into the city. Obviously, as Stats SA, we've seen a lag effect as to how many jobs will be then created effectively from that. When you go to Nelson Mandela Bay, we're very clear about, we've introduced programs very similar to what Harambee looks like, which allows more young people to run internship, apprenticeship programs, and we're trying to composition of job creation is. Half of why our Gini coefficient is so wide is fundamentally because we've got a lot of people who are not working. So let's get. Johannesburg has already introduced other different interventions. I went there to launch the Kupuga Center, which is designed to attract micro-enterprise, give them registrations, allow them to be able to trade in the city so that they can get capital and create more jobs. So we've got to focus on that. Our key driver must be job creation if we're going to attend to other social ills such as inequality and poverty. So we must start there if we're ultimately going to get this thing right over the long period of time. Thank you very much.
Sorry, specifically Johannesburg, it was 120,000 jobs.
So Joburg was 120,000 jobs.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, leader. Thank you, everyone, for coming. I'm not going to open for a second round of questions.
I'll send you some of these.
Yeah.